What causes a person's nervous system to get chronically stuck in the sympathetic state of fight, flight all the time and be dysregulated in the first place? Is there scientific or physiological explanation for this? And this was a really great question that I'm exploring in a couple of ways with you, because I really want you all to feel like you understand this, because often we talk about the nervous system in these very vague terms, and I'm always interested in trying to figure out ways to make this more accessible. So let's first talk about how the nervous system works in normal, idyllic life that doesn't have chronic stress overlaid on it. So let's imagine one way to look at this is thousands of years ago, how would the nervous system have worked? One of the easiest ways to think about this is to think about homeostasis. Homeostasis is an idealized baseline that it's a model, a way of looking at the way the body naturally works. Homeostasis is always relative to deviation from baseline. So if you think, okay, what is your baseline state? Maybe you're relaxed, you're well fed. There's a certain baseline where your body is happy. Whenever we have external events and internal events that perturb this homeostasis, this baseline, there's always a pattern that the body follows, body processes follow to get back to baseline. And if you're interested in this, it's called opponent processes. But what you can see here visually is that whenever your body overshoots one way, to get back to baseline, it never just goes to baseline, it overshoots the opposite way. And a really clear example of this is how the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems work together. Whenever you have a big sympathetic response, so you hear some stressful news, or you wake up in pain and you feel fear, or you wake up in the middle of the night and you don't feel safe in your body, the sympathetic nervous system kicks in, goes one direction, and the parasympathetic nervous system naturally kicks in to bring it the other way. And this is how you reach normal. It's sort of a conversation between these two sides. So normal, baseline, getting back to baseline is never just, okay, return to baseline. It's overshooting each way until the nervous system reverberates back into baseline. This pattern is something that you see at all levels of the nervous system, all levels. It's like, of any of the biological truths, I could say that this is one of the biological truths. For instance, whenever you move and you expend energy, your body's natural response is to kick in fatigue and recuperation responses. That is what it naturally does. And then that gives you enough energy to expend more energy. And then you need to rest again. So this happens with movement. This happens with drugs and medications. For instance, if you take a benzodiazepine that relaxes you, so you increase relaxation, your body naturally kicks in after a bit and increases a little bit of anxiety to try to get to baseline again. So drugs work this way, inflammation works this way. Your body has a pro-inflammatory response as a way to recruit molecules to an area that's inflamed. And then after a while, it kicks in an anti-inflammatory response to bring you back the other direction. And those happen until you get back to normal. So what we can learn here is that there's a pattern, a natural pattern that our bodies follow. And this is one way of describing resilience of the nervous system or adaptability. It's understanding that the body moves in these opposites to get back to baseline. What this means, and I want to draw attention here, just because I think that this is an important pattern that I've noticed of people who have been high performers in a lot of their lives. a lot of their life. And part of the pain experience, there's a big fatigue element. The fatigue is there for a reason. If we push ourselves so much, if we push our nervous systems for years in high stress jobs and do not give our bodies the opportunity to rest and recuperate, there are consequences for that. And what it could mean is the trajectory of this changes to where, I mean, I could modify this, but the fatigue dips would get lower and lower and lower, because your body is trying to maintain, it's trying to get back to your baseline, and what you're feeding it is not supporting that baseline. So your body responds with fatigue. In a sense, whenever I see someone who is a high performer, who has a really strong experience of fatigue with their pain, I tell them to rest. I tell them to explore what restful, recuperative living is like. And that's so hard for so many people because these are the overachievers. And whenever they get to the point where they're exhausted and they're tired, they judge themselves so harshly for needing to rest. And what it really is their bodies are begging them to slow down and to take a break and to let them replenish themselves. It's essentially the body saying, I need to rest. I need support right now. Please don't push me further, because I want to last for you. I want to be there for you in the long term. And the way I know how to do that is to rest. So if you feel fatigue, the opposite, another way of interpreting fatigue is my body is asking for deep rest. And understanding there's a wisdom in that is really important for many people's journeys. So we have this pattern that on the molecular level, on the nervous system level, it's a level, it's something that is supported by science for the past like 70 years. It's a really strong finding. So what happens whenever the nervous system gets stuck? Well, this is what happens. So you notice that there's still the nervous system's attempt to try to return to baseline, but it's all stuck up in the red here, stuck in a high sympathetic arousal state. There are lots of reasons for this. If one of the best books that describes this is by Robert Sapolsky, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And I love that book because he speaks so clearly about what chronic stress does to the body. So if you want to know about the biology of it, or just know the reason for it, that's an excellent, it explains why there's this heightened state that just sort of gets stuck in this, and the word stuck is really accurate because it's sort of like resonating at this higher frequency of stress. And what this means when the nervous system is up here is it's really hard to bring it back down to the parasympathetic state, into the rest and digest state. So what this means, to interrupt this, you really need to work hard on bringing down the sympathetic tone by relaxation. If I were to, I know it sounds weird, but practicing relaxation is a learnable skill. And the more you practice it, the lower these dips will go to where you'll start to go past baseline again. And that's what you need to return to baseline. But before we get there, it's important to know what creates this state. There is one paper that I found that discusses this in a useful way, and it's not a perfect paper, but it's called When Pain Gets Stuck, and I'll send it out as materials with the email afterward. When Pain Gets Stuck, the evolution of pain chronification and treatment resistance. This paper, I suggest it just first to reinforce how little we know about why pain gets stuck, even though there's all these, I have all these, bullet points on the page, we still don't understand it very well. Most of the evidence that we have are cognitive affective reasons why it's sticky. And so the bulk of this evidence, if I were to, say like probably 60% of the studies have been done here, maybe, I don't know, 30% here and 10% here. So the one I want you to really focus on is the cognitive affective stickiness. And the patterns that seem to stand out across the literature is whenever something that is proactive shifts into something that isn't useful anymore. So for instance, whenever proactive problem solving shifts into rumination and catastrophizing. So there's the initial idea, I'm going to solve this problem. There's nothing wrong with that. That's protective. But it can turn into ruminative thought where you're just reinforcing the emotions and the memories. Repetitive fear and avoidance behavior reinforce pain also. Pain and its consequences, like all of the consequences on your life, are then interpreted as unavoidably catastrophic. So if we look at this, what this is like positive attempts to problem solve become looped. There are feedback loops in the brain that reinforce them. Fear and avoidance reinforces them. And the interpretation of the pain reinforces them. These are all things that we have some control over, even though each of these bullet points are challenging. But these are the majority of the evidence on why pain gets sticky and why it gets stuck are things that we can change with how we think, how we feel, and how we move, which means much more than treatment resistance, et cetera. Like it means that most of this is in our power, in a sense. There are some really generic studies. I call them generic just because it's like, oh, who has pain for longer? So they aren't scientifically looking at it as much. But for instance, there are certain kinds of people that seem to be more prone to stickiness, females more than males, because we have these beautiful, natural, emotional brains, and we, can learn emotional patterns so much better, which makes us, it makes it easier to learn chronic pain. People who are older rather than younger, potentially because older people have more rigid personality structures and just ways of looking at things. Also lower socioeconomic status, which essentially means life stress. What stress level are you carrying? What is your emotional burden? One of the reasons why I'm not crazy about this type of paper, and it's not the easiest paper to read, but I'll still send it out because I know that some people here will read it, is that they tend to put everything under this term allostatic load, which is an older term that just means the impact of cumulative stress on your nervous system. So although that's uncomfortably vague, it's also informative in that it reinforces that the weight of what your nervous system is carrying is contributing to pain stickiness. And of course, if you have anxiety and depression, which is very common with pain, that adds to the stickiness. But again, if you're looking at stress and if you're looking at anxiety and depression, one of the proactive ways to look at that is also thoughts, emotions, behaviors. So again, it's still under our control. There are some studies that suggest that certain genes could influence how someone's body reacts to stress and how the immune system responds to stress, but there are so few studies on this that I don't really put a lot of faith into that part of it. And the other part that always I shy away from genetics discussions, even though I was trained in a pain genetics lab, is that even if you have a set of genes that predisposes you to have more sticky pain, for example, whether those genes are expressed is dependent on your behavior, your diet, things that are under your control. So I think one of the most harmful narratives has been the idea that like genes are your destiny. No, You can turn genes on and off based on your behavior and based on your self-care, essentially, your activity level, all of these things. So in a sense, it then goes back to what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and how you're acting based on it. So that's what's, I think the best evidence of what pain stickiness is under our control. And so in terms of taking this to a level that's actionable, I encourage us all, me too, to take a realistic look at the burden that your nervous system is carrying. So what is creating chronic stress in your life? What is preventing you or keeping you from recuperating? What is the negative emotional burden you're carrying? What is your nervous system carrying? Because what I notice so much is that as we accumulate this burden, it not only creates physical symptoms, but it becomes exhausting. And so whenever these emotions come up to be witnessed, that is actually part of your nervous system releasing stuff it's been holding on to. It's not a bad sign. It doesn't mean you're having a breakdown after everything else that's happened. It means these things can no longer be held in your body. They have to go. So it's a bit of a different way of looking at symptoms, because that can be both physical and it can be emotional. It can be memories. So I often think, as time goes on, I often think of physical pain and emotional pain and memories all as patterns that are being released from the nervous system. And how we respond to that determines how much we suffer. In that you can have the same amount of pain, and I'm not saying that in an accusatory way, but you can have the same amount of pain with compassion and with understanding and just like, okay, this is what my body needs to feel like right now. Or you can put on the layers of judgment. And we have all been trained from early age to judge ourselves. So this is no easy feat. But in a sense, it's a challenge to step back from judging ourselves and to instead look at, what does my body need? What patterns in my life do I need to let go of because they just aren't, I just can't do it anymore. And it's okay to let go of those patterns, even if it disappoints other people, even if it pushes some people away. Because if your body can't carry that weight, if you need something to heal, if you need space to heal, there's no room anymore to hold on to those patterns. And your body's